Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to cilinixfxcapital. Hope you're all doing great. Hope you're having a great week so far, and welcome to this middle of the day market update. I'm going to do a full update right now on the crypto markets. The New York session has just opened about 15 minutes. So at this point of time, I mean, it's a relatively slow opening. The volume at this point of time is still relatively low. If we check out the last couple of days, the volume came in a little bit later. So we're probably going to get some major moves, hopefully to the upside. I think to the upside in a moment. But at this point of time, it's still a little bit unclear. And in general, before we get into this video, which we'll talk about some fundamentals, there's quite a lot of headlines I have to the left of me, which we will not go over all of that, but there are some bits and pieces that I do want to also tell you. But then we'll talk about Bitcoin, and we'll look at the fundamentals. Then we'll talk about Bitcoin. We'll talk about Ethereum briefly. We'll talk about XRP briefly. And then we'll talk about altcoins. There are some altcoins at this point of time that I think are interesting, even though, as you can see right here, this looks quite crazy. That's the August market, right? And I've said this time and time again, be ready for some strange price action. And quite volatile price action over the course of August, because that can and will happen. But most altcoins right now are correlated, but there are still a couple of altcoins that I think are interesting and worth it to highlight. So that's what we'll do. So let's start off with some fundamentals, right? So for the fundamentals, the main things that I'd like to look at is the volatility index, which has dropped down a bit, is still elevated compared to the last week. Fine, it's relatively stable. Gold has also rejected at the value area high. So there was quite a lot of, since last week, there was a little bit of instability and some unrest in the financial markets. That's still higher than the week before and higher than the majority of July. But it has decreased since last week, so that's good to see. And so far, the S&P 500 has just opened. It's a relatively flat opening, right? We opened a little bit higher, we dropped down a little bit, but this is flat, right? I mean, it's yeah. I mean, there's not much to say about that. And this is quite important, right? I mean, it's going to be important to see how the equities develop over the course of today, because headlines are quite mixed, right? If I look to the left of me, I have some headlines. We got some Apple news talking about a US manufacturing plan. And there's some sort of a major announcement with Apple and President Donald Trump in a moment. So that's considered, I would argue, maybe a little bit bullish, right? Because that's good for the US economy, or at least it's supposed to be good for the US economy. And the US economy and data around that is still very important for crypto as well. But then we also have some Federal Reserve meetings where someone from the Federal Reserve, I think Kashkari, said that they could even, if the inflation keeps rising, they could even pause or hike the interest rates. There's some India-Russia news. There's a lot, all right? So ultimately, with all those fundamentals and all those headlines, what I usually say is look at the fundamentals, and then you have a better idea. And at this point of time, the fundamentals seem stable. All right. So that also opens up the way, talking about Bitcoin, for a move up. I've said, if you take a look at Bitcoin right here, I've said it looks like we are forming some sort of a balance right here. We're at the bottom of the balance. The top of the balance is more towards 115.5. I don't see a reason right now, especially given how the fundamentals are developing. I don't see a reason that we should drop down. Drop down lower than this balance and drop down into the next support level at 111 and 110,000. So therefore, look, if news comes in that does warrant that, we can drop down. But for now, I think it's a little bit more likely that we will remain relatively stable and that we will be able to see a move up to the top of that range. Do I think we're going to be able to break above that? Unfortunately, no, but that is also something that's dependent on news. And if we actually do get a very strong recovery across equities, it is a possibility. All right, so I think overall Bitcoin stability and a little bit of bullish momentum is most likely. And honestly, and that's also because everything is very correlated, that is also what I expect from Ethereum and XRP. Ethereum is at the bottom of the range right here. I think it's most likely that we're going to move to the upside. XRP is at the bottom. Well, no, XRP is at a strong support here. There's room to the upside, some imbalances to the upside. I think it's most likely we'll move into that as well, which is very boring because I'm basically saying the same about 3 different cryptocurrencies. But in my view, in my analysis, it is the truth right now. And I'm here to tell you the truth. And before we get into altcoins, right, because I think it's worth it to look at those, like I said, I do want to stress you know, emphasize, I guess, that this is dependent on the fundamentals, right? So there's a lot of headlines coming out. If for some reason we see an aggressive selling pressure going on again for equities, it could turn around very, very quickly. And I still think when we're looking at the next 2 weeks or so, I think a move for Bitcoin into 111 and 110,000 is not only quite likely, but potentially even most likely, right? So that's, you know, a little bit more medium term. But short term, you know, things could happen quite quickly depending on the fundamentals. So when we're talking about altcoins, I've covered this coin yesterday as well, but I still think Litecoin is very interesting. It's nearing some major support levels right now as well at 114 and 112. So if we get a good reaction there, I think we can easily rally into 138. So that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on. And what more do we have? Pump.fun, but I've spoken about that as well. Spell. We're showing some momentum, but this is a very notorious scam coin. What more do we have? I mean, the Ethereum beta ecosystem this morning was doing quite well, so that might be something to keep your eyes on. Optos is showing some momentum where normally it doesn't really show that momentum. But that's about it. I mean, like I said, a lot of coins right now are correlated, so there's not a lot of outperformance, which is obviously what you want to see for opportunities. But those are my thoughts. I think that's what you need to know for now. Still very volatile while I'm ending this video, so be careful in these markets. But hopefully that helps. Those are my thoughts. Thank you for watching. Take care and bye.